$725 million. That is what his investors made in 2008, while every other fund in America was collapsing, while banks were failing, while ordinary people were losing their homes. His clients became wealthy on the worst day in modern financial history. This is not a story about a man who predicted a crash. It is a story about what happens when you see something the entire world refuses to see. Within 24 hours of his name appearing, gold suffered its worst single day since the 1980s. Silver collapsed 26% in under 20 hours. And over the following weeks, $1.2 trillion quietly disappeared from software stocks. Not because of a war, not because of a recession, because of one man's opinion about how money should work. He is not a celebrity. He does not give interviews. He does not appear on television. He sits alone in a small office in Saratoga, California, and reads. And when Michael Burry reads something the rest of the world has missed, markets move. Michael James Burry was 2 years old when the doctors told his parents he had retinoblastoma, a rare cancer, aggressive, growing behind his left eye. They removed the eye. Other kids did not let him forget. He learned early that being different from everyone around you was not something the world rewarded. It was something you survived. He retreated into research, into numbers, into the kind of work that rewards obsession over charm. He discovered the stock market in second grade. By high school, he was investing real money. He went to UCLA, then Vanderbilt Medical School, then Stanford, a neurology residency. During surgery, he once fell asleep standing up, collapsing into a patient's oxygen tent. The surgeon threw him out of the operating room, not because he was careless, because he had been awake all night. His investment letters from residency were not polished financial documents. They were obsessive, detailed, running to dozens of pages. He wrote about companies nobody else was covering, small businesses, overlooked sectors, things that required real reading to understand. Joel Greenblatt, one of the most respected value investors alive, read one of those letters. Then he called Burry directly. Greenblatt gave him $1 million to manage. Burry had never professionally managed money in his life. He had a prosthetic eye, an unfinished medical residency, and $300,000 of his own savings. He named the fund after a fantasy novel he loved, Scion Capital. Burry, in his first full year, while the dot-com bubble was destroying professional fund managers who had spent decades building their careers, Scion Capital returned 55%. The S&P 500 fell 11% that same year. He had not gotten lucky, he had gotten there first, when the red numbers were piling up and he had locked them in. Do you trust the analysis, or do you trust the market? And in 2001, when the dot-com bubble burst and the S&P 500 fell 11%, Scion Capital returned 55%. Not by luck, by reading. By 2004, he was managing $600 million. And then he started reading documents nobody else was reading. In the autumn of 2005, while most of Wall Street celebrated ever-rising housing prices, Michael Burry was losing sleep. Late into the night, he pored over pages of mortgage-backed securities, loan-to-value ratios, and default probabilities. He was not reading what analysts said about the housing market. He was reading the actual mortgage documents themselves, thousands of them. What he found was this: banks were lending money to people who could not afford to pay it back. Not a few, not a small number, millions of people. Loans with introductory teaser rates that would reset to rates 2, 3, sometimes 4 times higher. When those rates reset, the borrowers would default. The loans would fail, and the securities built on top of those loans would collapse. The problem: There was no way to bet against the housing market. The financial instrument he needed did not exist. So he called Goldman Sachs and asked them to create one. The banks considered this almost free money. They were happy to sell him insurance on something they were certain would never fail. In May 2005, Burry purchased $60 million in credit default swaps from Deutsche Bank, $10 million each on 6 separate bonds. He selected the bonds with the worst underlying mortgages. By October 2005, he had over $1 billion in subprime mortgage shorts. Here is where the story changes. His investors did not celebrate. They panicked. For nearly 2 years, the position produced nothing but losses. Every month, Burry paid premiums on his credit default swaps, while the housing market kept rising. His investors saw red numbers in their statements. They sent hostile letters. They demanded redemptions. They threatened lawsuits. Internal emails later revealed that Goldman Sachs executives were deliberately minimizing the value of his positions on paper to cause, in their words, maximum pain for holders of credit insurance like Burry. He held, not out of stubbornness, out of certainty. He had read the documents. He knew what was inside those bonds. No amount of hostile letters changed what was written in the fine print. There is a moment where Burry sat alone in his office and restricted his investors from withdrawing their capital. He used a legal clause. He locked them in. The first crack appeared in February 2007. HSBC announced losses on its subprime mortgage portfolio. Then, Bear Stearns' hedge funds collapsed. Then, the teaser rates on millions of mortgages began to reset. Exactly as Burry had predicted. The same Goldman Sachs traders who had been applying maximum pressure began calling him, asking to buy back the credit default swaps they had sold him, at generous prices. Their sudden interest could only mean one thing. The underlying mortgages were starting to fail. By 2008, 9% of all mortgages in America were in default. Scion Capital had returned 489% since inception. His investors made $725 million. He personally made $100 million, and nobody called him. He contacted the government multiple times to see if anyone wanted to interview him about how he had seen the crisis coming. Nobody responded. Millions of Americans lost their homes, their savings, their retirements. They had bought houses with the teaser rate mortgages Burry had read about in those documents. They had trusted that the banks would not lend them money they could not afford to repay. They were wrong. The banks were wrong. The ratings agencies were wrong. The regulators were wrong. Burry was right. And being right felt like nothing he had expected. He shut Scion Capital down in 2008. IRS audits followed. Public backlash followed. The man who had just made his investors $725 million was treated as a villain for having profited from suffering. He had tried to warn people about, and nobody had listened. He disappeared. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was a princess of Troy who was given the gift of prophecy. She could see the future with perfect accuracy. Apollo also cursed her. Nobody would ever believe her. She watched Troy burn. She had told them it would happen. She had seen every step of the destruction coming, and nobody listened. When Michael Burry launched his newsletter in November 2025, he named it Cassandra Unchained. He chose that name himself. He reopened in 2013 as Scion Asset Management. His focus had shifted. Water, farmland, gold. He believed the next crisis would not be financial. It would be a water crisis. The market ignored him. In 2021, he had held GameStop before the meme stock explosion. He sold before the peak. The internet made him simultaneously a legend and a joke. Millions of retail investors tracked his SEC filings like prophecy, following moves they did not understand into positions he had already exited. In 2025, his filings revealed he had taken over $1 billion in put options against Nvidia and Palantir, betting that the AI boom was a bubble. Palantir's CEO called him bat crazy. In November 2025, he wrote to his investors with a heavy heart that he was shutting Scion Asset Management. His estimation of values in securities was not, now, and had not been for some time, in sync with the markets. He returned their capital. His post on X read, "Sometimes we see bubbles. Sometimes there is something to do about it. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play." He had said almost exactly those words before, in 2008. You own something right now that Michael Burry thinks is overvalued. If you own an index fund, and the majority of serious investors do, you own Nvidia, you own Palantir, you own the companies he has bet against. He may be wrong. He has been wrong before, and early, which in investing is the same thing. But here is what his entire career teaches, and it is not what most people take from The Big Short. The lesson is not bet against the market. The lesson is where his edge actually came from. Every single time, he read the primary documents. Not the analysis, not the headlines, not what someone else thought about the documents. The actual source material, the mortgage contracts themselves, the bond prospectuses nobody else opened. He was doing nothing more than analyzing financial statements, but simply analyzing statements set him apart. No one else was bothering to do the hard, tedious work. His current concern is specific. He argues that companies like Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and Meta are investing billions in Nvidia chips and servers while quietly extending depreciation schedules to make earnings look smoother. By his estimates, between 2026 and 2028, these accounting decisions could understate depreciation by around $176 billion, inflating reported profits across the entire sector. Is he right? Nobody knows yet. But the question he is asking is the same question he asked in 2005. Are you reading the documents, or are you reading what someone else thinks about the documents? He named himself after a woman cursed to always be right and never be believed. He is still making the call. The market is still not listening. One of them is wrong. There is a question only you can answer. And it is the same question Burry's investors faced in 2006. Drop your answer below. And if you want to understand the mechanism behind why Burry thinks AI stocks are vulnerable, the same mathematical framework that explained the 2008 crash, that is the next video.